We are recording. Amazing. Welcome, everybody. This is a very special Super Salon, our second this year, with Nir Eyal, the best-selling and beloved author of Hooked and Indistractable, which is a very meta and ironic and super on-brand book for interintellects around the world, since we pride ourselves at being interested in everything all the time, right? Multiple people will tell you that they attend salons in the middle of the night for them, and try to figure out how to attend them all, how to read all of the books, read all of the internet, and generally memorize the entirety of Wikipedia. So we will contrast these paradoxes. I know, Nir, you love contradictions and when two things are true at the same time. So we will be delving into them. And I'm joined by Isabela Granic, who is one of our very popular Interintellect hosts and a developmental psychology professor as well, and somebody who designs games for emotional and mental well-being. So we will look at the other angle of this, what happens when technology is designed for helping fellow humans flourish. Nir, before I pass the mic on to Isabela, I have to say, there's this joke that I kept thinking about while reading the book, which is, lead us not into temptation, we can find our way.
Exactly.
This is what we will be discussing today. So thank you so much for being here, and Isabela, take the floor.
Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome, Nir. It's great to actually meet you, although this is such a funny way to meet, but we've spoken, I think, once on the phone and certainly emailed a little bit. And in a different world, you also had several conversations with my husband, who is a neuroscientist who studies addiction, for, I think, your previous book or something like that. And so I, being a good academic, have done my reading and I have tons of questions.
That's like
you.
Catnip for authors. Seeing your book
Yeah.
with that many bookmarks is like that's the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're also, of course, color coded for questions and
love it,
conflicts and please dig deeper and so on. Anyway,
the path
I'm really
to my
excited.
heart.
Yeah. No, it was a real pleasure to read, and in particular because the topic and its actual nuances are so interesting on a personal level. I have two almost 15-year-old boys who might be on distractible kind of devices once in a while, and I also have a professional life that very much is at this kind of intersection of looking at technologies that both serve us and I think and also do us a disservice at times. And in particular, part of what we try to do in our research lab is kind of find the conditions under which it's one versus the other, rather than consider any one technology or digital space a good or bad for you sort of place. And I really appreciate that sort of nuance, both in your book, but also in your career, which I hope we'll be able to sort of talk a little bit about, not just about just where you started from and how you shifted over for this particular book, because I think you were actually dealing with a lot of the conflicts we all are thinking about, and the paradoxes, and particularly now in the middle of a pandemic where many of us are locked down and many of us don't have the opportunity to safely do a lot of the things and meet a lot of the needs that we have. And we're doing that instead in a digital context like this, right? So I would love to dive in. I wonder if you want to just say a few words first, an introduction, before I dive into more specific questions, or how you'd like to start with us.
So yeah, there's a few different paths we could take. We could, I have a presentation that I'm happy to share some slides that kind of introduce the topic, or I love Q&A. We can just dive into it. Whatever you all want to do, I'm happy to do.
Okay, well then maybe we can do a little bit of a combo. We're all really patient and relaxed, and so I'm pretty sure that I've spoken to your slides to some degree. I've been doing this for some time as an academic, so I would hope that I'm asking questions that are relevant to you and what you want to present. So you can maybe just slip into your slides as soon as you would, and I'm sure Anna, does he have the hosting capacity? You'll do
So
that.
get the hook to capacity,
Because
right?
we can just starting with your why, about why you wrote this book right now. I think it's an incredibly timely book with principles and practices, very practical practices that we all could benefit from. And I'd like to hear a little bit about how you came to write this book.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my background is that I'm a behavioral designer. So I help companies build the kind of products and services that help form good habits in people's lives. And so my background is that I taught for several years at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and later at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design, where I helped companies build the kind of products that get people to come back on their own out of habit. And I essentially stole the secrets of the companies that do this better than anyone, right? So I took from Facebook and Google and Instagram and the gaming companies and Slack. I learned from these best in class products what were the common patterns behind the kind of products that get us hooked, not for their benefit. They've known these techniques for decades. I wanted to democratize these tactics so that anyone out there building a product or service that requires repeat engagement can use the same psychology. Why should it just be the gaming companies and the social media companies that get us hooked? What if we could get people hooked to exercise and education and civic engagement? Well, it turns out we absolutely can. As you know well from your background, there are all kinds of companies that since Hooked was published have utilized the Hook model for good. So companies like Kahoot, the world's largest educational software company, uses the Hook model to get kids hooked onto in classroom learning. Companies like Fitbod get people hooked to exercise in the gym. I recently invested in a company that uses the Hook model called Cutback Coach that helps people cut back on their consumption of alcohol. So there's all kinds of ways we can use these very same tactics to build good habits. And that's what Hooked was for. Now, the flip side is that sometimes products are designed to be so engaging that sometimes they become a distraction. And so for me, to answer your question, where I found that I needed to reassess my relationship with distraction was a very particular instance when I was with my daughter one afternoon and we had this beautiful day planned, just some quality daddy-daughter time. And I remember we had this book of activities that we could use to kind of help us bond. And, some of the activities included make a paper airplane and have a paper airplane flying contest, fill out a Sudoku puzzle, things like that. One of the activities in the book, I'll never forget, it was to ask each other this question. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember that question verbatim, but I cannot tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, I thought that it was the right time to just do this one quick thing. I just got to do this one thing on my phone. And when I looked up from my device, she was gone. She left the room to go play with some toy outside because I was sending her a very clear message that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was.
I love so much this idea that, and I feel that there is this really deep philosophical truth somewhere here, where you say, okay, I'm using tools to further my goals. And then those very tools will be the distraction that will stop me from achieving those goals. And you're portraying the human in this almost hostile environment of the world, where you have to take back the control and you have to rediscover your autonomy. So I can imagine that in a parenting scenario, this is not just about you taking back the control, but also to teach that and to show an example.
Yeah, because if I'm honest with you, it didn't just happen with my daughter, and it didn't just happen once. It would happen when I came into the office and I'd say, okay, now I'm going to focus. I'm going to work on that big project. And I do everything but work on that thing that I'm procrastinating on. It would happen when I would say to myself, I'm definitely going to start eating right and exercising. And I wouldn't for yet another day. The problem that we face today is not that we don't know what to do. Who doesn't know how to get in shape? Can anybody honestly say we need to buy a diet book to tell us to eat right and exercise? We know. We all know if you want to have good relationships with people that are important in your life, you have to be fully present with them. Don't we all know that? Don't we all know that if we want to be better at our jobs, we have to do the work, especially the hard stuff that other people don't want to do? We all know this already. So the question is not, what do we do? The question is, how do we stop getting in our own way? So if you asked me today, the answer to this question that my daughter and I we're supposed to be talking about, the question, the answer that I would give is that I would want the power to be indistractable. And that's when I decided that what I wanted was simply the power to follow through on what I knew I should do with my time. Because if you don't decide how you spend your time and attention, someone's going to decide for you. And so that's why I call this the skill of the century, that there is no facet of your life that is not affected by your capacity to decide how you will spend your time and attention. It is absolutely critical, and it's only going to become more difficult. If you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years, right? With augmented reality and virtual reality and who knows whatever their other realities, the world is only going to become a more distracting place, which is why it is absolutely imperative that we teach our kids how to become indistractable without making them fearful of technology. I don't buy this chicken little tech critic argument that technology is hijacking our brains, that it's addicting everyone. Rubbish, silly. The science doesn't support any of that nonsense. And in fact, it's highly disempowering. And so what I want to do is I'm on a quest here to show people that we are far more powerful than these technology companies. That in fact, telling ourselves and other people that the technology is addicting us all only leads to learned helplessness. And in fact, is exactly what those companies want us to believe. Because when we espouse this nonsense that we're addicted and it's hijacking our brains, guess what people do? Nothing. They give up. They say, well, there's nothing I can do. People are just addicted. It's hijacking my brain. Why should I try? And so they give up altogether. And so this is what I'm trying to fight against, is to show people, look, folks, it's not that hard. We can do this. We can all become indistractable.
So I really love that sort of empowering message, and particularly for young people, because they have been hearing the stigmatizing message for decades. It's not just about smartphones. It's about the, all of the TV that we watched in the 80s. And then it was, before that, it was radio, and it even was newspapers, and how, it goes on. And I think that that's extremely important as a more meta lesson in terms of many of us going out there and making the message way more nuanced around the technology, so that there is, first of all, just a discussion around the properties of technology that we want as our own sort of prosthetics, and in contexts where it could be really useful and otherwise not. So I really like that sort of empowered and also anti-stigma sort of messaging, and then to do something about it, because I think we'll dive into, the practical stuff maybe in the second half of our discussion. But I want to take us way back before we start here, and to just push a little bit against this, not against so much, but just to dig deeper a little around the this century superpower, because I feel like I have been reading at least for 10 years, but probably since I was, started graduate school, around the problem of distractibility, and whether it's called attention, or whether it's called lack of mindfulness, or whether it's called so on. We can go back to the Stoics. I wonder if this is a problem of this century, and if it isn't just a problem of our humanity forever and ever, that we were distractible, in that we had something we needed to do or should do, and we have other things that are lower hanging fruit, that are shinier or more pleasant, or scratch those itches of immediate gratification, in a way that other things that take longer to work at, to get engaged in, are just harder to do, right? So do you really think this is about this century and these technologies and Facebook, or do you think it's a bigger sort of humanity issue?
Yeah. So you are absolutely right that this is not a new problem. That Plato, the Greek philosopher, talked about distraction 2,500 years ago. He complained about what he called in the Greek akrasia, the tendency that we have to do things against our better interest. So the fact that Plato was complaining about distraction 2,500 years before Facebook, before the iPhone, before any of this stuff, this can't be the cause. And as you said, people have always been complaining. I mean, literally, if you listen to what people say, I don't know how many of you have seen the Social Dilemma movie on Netflix, what people are saying in that movie is verbatim what they said about comic books, the radio. It's literally the same thing. Now, that being said, if you are looking for distraction, it's easier than ever to find. That's unequivocal. I mean, the fact that this technology is so ubiquitous, is so easy to find, it makes it that makes it so that if you are looking for this type of distraction, you'll find it, and of course they can find you as well, right? Because of how easy it is to get to this technology. Now, that being said, that does not mean that we are powerless. That I think the best place to start is to understand what distraction is at large. That it's not just about tech distraction. That's not what Indistractable is about. Of course, there's a lot in there about technology, but I wanted to make it a much bigger topic because, the first thing I did before I wrote the book was I read other people's books on this topic to see, what has already been written. If other people have solved this problem already, well, great. Let me just read their book and solve this for me. So I did what they told me to do. I got rid of my technology. I did the digital detox. I got rid of my technology. In fact, I remember I got myself a flip phone, a $12 flip phone from Alibaba that had no internet access, no apps on it. All I could do was make phone calls and send SMS text messages. And I also got myself a word processor off of eBay from the 1990s, like this thing that had no internet connection. I thought, you see, now I'm going to be able to focus. Now I can stop procrastinating. I'll finally do my work. I'll finally be able to do what I say I'm going to do. Here we go. Nothing's going to stop me. I'm going to get started. But there's that book on the bookshelf that I probably should do some research in. Or, man, my desk is really cluttered. I should probably clean it off. Or the trash, the trash needs to be taken out. And I kept getting distracted, even without this modern technology. And so here's the thing. We have to start with, what is the definition of technology? This is one of the, of distraction. It's one of these terms that people tend to think they know what distraction is. I certainly thought I knew what distraction meant, but I didn't really understand what it meant, in that I couldn't tell you what the antonym of distraction. It's a great way to know if you really understand something, is to see if you know what is the opposite of that thing. So if you ask most people, what is the opposite of distraction? Most people will tell you the opposite of distraction, of course, is focus, right? Isn't that the opposite of distraction? Well, not exactly. That if you look at the origin of the word distraction, the opposite is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. That both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And they both end in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N, that spells action. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you say you're going to do, things that you do with intent, things that move you towards your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of traction. The opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that moves you farther away from what you plan to do, farther away from your values and becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this isn't just semantics. This is really important for this discussion, because I would argue any action can be traction or distraction based on one word. And that one word is forethought. Forethought. That any action that is not what you plan to do with your time is by definition a distraction, right? So any action can be a distraction. Let me give you a great example. So for years, I would sit down at my desk. By the way, it took me 5 years to write Indistractable. You know why? Because for 5 years, I kept getting distracted. I didn't know how to use these techniques. It took me forever to read the research to boil down what really works. Today, I can proudly say I'm Indistractable once I started putting these techniques to use. But for me, I didn't want anecdotes. I wanted peer-reviewed, journaled studies, right? That was really important to me. And the book has 30 pages of citations in it, to show you the references to these studies. But it took me a long time to figure those out. But here's what I would do. My daily routine used to be, I would sit down at my desk and I would say, okay, now I'm not going to procrastinate. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to work on that big project. Here I go. I'm going to get started right now. Nothing's going to take me off course. I'm not going to get distracted. But first, let me just check some email. Let me just scroll that Slack channel real quick. Let me just do that one thing on my to-do list that's kind of easy, just to get some momentum, right? I got to do it anyway. Email is a worky task. I got to do that sometime today. I'll just do that first, right? And what I didn't realize is that is the most dangerous, pernicious form of distraction. The distraction that tricks you into prioritizing the easy and the urgent at the expense of the important. Pseudo productivity. Anything can be a distraction, even the stuff that feels work related. That's the worst kind of distraction, because it's not what you plan to do with your time. On the other end of the spectrum is traction. And I would argue that anything can be traction. As Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So don't listen to these people who tell you Facebook is melting your brain and stop using YouTube and video games are bad for you. Rubbish, silly. If you want to play a video game, who says that playing a video game is somehow morally inferior to watching a football game on TV? There's no difference. Anything you want to do with your time, as long as you're doing it according to your values and your schedule, is fine if it's done with forethought. So now we have the two ends of the spectrum. We have traction and we have distraction, right? You can think of kind of an arrow pointing to the right and an arrow pointing to the left, traction and distraction. Now, what prompts us to traction and distraction? We have what we call triggers. There are two types of triggers, and you can think of them as arrows bisecting into the middle of this number line. So you've got, at the bottom, you've got external triggers that prompt us to either traction or distraction. And these are the usual suspects. This is what people tend to blame when they get distracted. They blame the external triggers, the pings, the dings, the rings, all of these things in our outside environment that can lead us towards distraction. But it turns out, studies find that is only 10% of the reason you get distracted. 10% of the time you check your phone, you're checking your phone because of a ping or ding. Only 10%. So what's the other 90%? 90% of the time you check your phone, you are checking your phone, studies have found this, because of what we call an internal trigger. What is an internal trigger? An internal trigger is an uncomfortable emotional state that we seek to escape from. This is the leading cause of distraction. Uncomfortable emotional states, fearfulness, boredom, anxiety, loneliness, fatigue, stress. It is our desire to escape discomfort that leads us towards distraction. So what we have to understand fundamentally, that look, no time management technique is going to work. No life hack, no productivity guru is going to solve your problem unless we understand first and foremost that procrastination and distraction is not a character flaw. There's nothing wrong with you. Your brain isn't somehow broken. It's simply that we haven't learned the tactics to deal with discomfort in a way that leads to traction rather than distraction. Because fundamentally, time management requires pain management. Let me say it again. Time management requires pain management. If you don't deal with that discomfort that is driving you towards distraction, you'll always find something to escape. Whether you're using too much booze, too much news, too much football, too much Facebook, you will always find something to take your mind off of that discomfort unless you know how to deal with it in a healthful rather than hurtful manner. Okay, so now we have our 4 strategies to becoming indistractable. So we've got this number line: traction, distraction, internal triggers, external triggers, and we just work our way around those 4 points of the compass, starting with mastering the internal triggers. That is step number 1, most important thing we can do: master the internal triggers. The next step is to make time for traction. There's the model. Perfect. Thank you, Isabella. The next step is to make time for traction. Because look, here's the thing. You cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. How many times do we hear people complaining about how distracting the world is and how this was on Facebook and that was on Twitter and my kids want this and my boss wants this? Oh my God, I didn't get anything done. But then when you ask folks, what did you plan to do with your time? Show me your calendar. Oh, there's nothing on my calendar. Maybe a dentist appointment or something. Right? But how do you know you got distracted unless you know what you got distracted from? And so I teach people how to use their values to build what we call a time box calendar, which is the most studied and effective technique we have ever found to help you accomplish your goals and live out your values. It's called time boxing. We can talk about that as well. The third step is to hack back the external triggers. Now, why do I call it hack back? To hack means to gain unauthorized access to something. So a computer hacker would hack into your bank account to try and gain unauthorized access to your money, right? And it's pretty clear that these media companies, not just the social media companies, but the traditional media companies, the newspaper, cable television, they all want to hack your attention. They want to gain unauthorized access to your time. Why? Because they sell that time to advertisers, not just Facebook. What do you think the business model of the New York Times or CNN or Fox News? They all sell your time and attention to advertisers, let alone your kids or your boss or your spouse. They all want to gain access to your attention, whether you like it or not. So in order to deal with those external triggers, we have to hack back. And we are much more powerful than they are if we use forethought, if we use intent to hack back those external triggers. So we can talk about, how do you hack back meetings? How do you hack back the news feed? How do you hack back emails? How do you hack back the fact that we're working from home and our kids can be a source of distraction? We can hack back all of those distractions. We can talk about that. Finally, the last and final step of the Indistractable model is to prevent distraction with pacts. Pacts are these firewalls, these lines of last defense to prevent us from getting distracted. And the way these work is that we make these commitments, these pre-commitments to ourselves. We have a price pact, an effort pact, and an identity pact that we can use as a last line of defense to prevent us from getting distracted. And so now we have our 4 steps: master internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and prevent distraction with pacts. This is how we become indistractable. So those are the 4 big strategies. Now we can talk details.
That's great. Thank you. That was a really great big picture. And I think Anna wanted to ask a question. You wanted to jump in there.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Nir, for outlining the points. First of all, it's so interesting. One of the main reasons that people give for keeping coming back to Interintellect salons is because they feel that for 3-4 hours they can avoid being distracted. We give each other undivided attention, and that kind of allowing for silence between questions often, or thoughts, that is just so hard to get out in the world. I'm so afraid of silence, right? We sometimes talk about how what happened to the great love stories on Netflix, where for a love story you need silence, because it is in silence where intimacy can flourish. But you don't have that on Netflix anymore, because if there's silence, the viewer might switch away and go to another platform, another film. So love stories have become incredibly noisy and less heartfelt. But I'm also wondering about the values question, because I thought a lot about your notes on forethought, and I think there's something else to it that may be worth exploring, which is that we can't always exercise forethought because we don't always know what we want in advance, especially in a world where technology is so rapidly changing. Most people don't even know what work means anymore. Is Slack work? I don't know. Is texting with my mom having a conversation with my mom? We just had a discussion about Esther Perel's latest book, where she's like, is texting with somebody else the same as flirting with somebody else? We don't know, right? We are discovering the world on the go. And most of us, have to do that every day. Every day we surprise ourselves. And so I'm wondering, are there moments when you just stop and say, okay, everybody, quiet. Let me just look at the latest chunk of my life and try to make plans for the next chunk, come what may, in technical development, or how to face life for ourselves so we can stay on track, to use your word, with our values, if the world underneath it is changing so fast. So if you have any notes on this, or if you think your framework can be applied, I think that would be super useful to
Sure. So this is not unique. Everybody feels this. Everybody feels like, I can't possibly plan my day. And believe me, I have heard Anna every excuse, and everybody's actually exactly the same. We can all exert some amount of agency over our time. And in fact, if we don't, we become slaves to other people's schedules and priorities and values. We use the same, it's not a coincidence that we use the same type of language around money as we do with time, right? We pay attention, just like we pay with dollars and cents. We wouldn't stand on the street corner and give everybody $100 bill until our bank account was deplenished. And yet, why do we feel like it's appropriate to give our attention? We pay attention. Why do we feel like anybody who wants our attention? Sure, take it. Oh, this is urgent. That needs to be done. Okay, fine. Whatever you want, I'll do. Ridiculous, right? If we don't decide how we plan our day, someone will plan it for us. And so that means we have to start time boxing, starting with our values. It's not that difficult. Here's what we do. What are values? You know, I'm a big word nerd. What are values? How do we define that? Values are defined as attributes of the person you want to become. Values are defined as attributes of the person you want to become. So the first step is to ask yourself, how would the person I want to become spend their time? And here I offer these 3 life domains, starting with the you domain. You are at the center of these 3 life domains. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people, you can't take care of contributing to the world and making a difference, you've got to take care of yourself first. But how many of us put on our schedule time to take care of ourselves according to our values? Now, it's not up to me or anyone else to tell you what your values should be, but I'm going to share with you some of my values. Okay, so physical health is one of my values. That's one of the attributes of the person I want to become. The person I want to become is a kind of person who takes care of their physical health. I used to be clinically obese. You know why? Because I didn't make time to exercise. I said someday. Oh yeah, I'll get to it. I never got to it. Now it's on my schedule. There's a time for it. We have heard ad nauseum about how important sleep is. We all know this. I don't need to tell you you need adequate sleep. How many of us tell our children you need a bedtime? But do we have a bedtime? Is it on our calendars? This is basic stuff. We have to have that time. And I'm not telling you how that time should be spent. You want to play video games? Awesome. You want to check social media? I sure do. Guess what? I've got that time on my schedule. I'm not checking social media whenever I need to escape boredom and loneliness. No, I check social media when it's on my schedule, right? I love the fact that I can connect with my friends and family on social media. It's wonderful. You know how many people I would not be in touch with were it not for these amazing technology? I mean, look at us right now. I'm in Singapore. You're in Europe. We've got people all over the world, and we're using this technology for free. I mean, we should all be celebrating. Our heads should be exploding by how amazing this technology is. And all we can do is complain about how distracting technology is. Give me a break. This technology is doing amazing things for us if we use it on our schedule, not according to the tech company's values and their schedule. So first we start with the you domain. Then comes the relationship domain. The reason we have this global, well, it's not global, it's actually only in industrialized nations. The reason we have this loneliness epidemic, I know we're seeing it, I'm most familiar with the research in the United States, where we know that loneliness is as detrimental to our health as smoking and obesity. It is an epidemic, this plague of loneliness that we are suffering through. Why? Why are people so lonely today? Well, it's because we don't have those regularly scheduled connections on our calendars the way we used to. And this is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that social media did. Robert Putnam talked about this in his book, Bowling Alone, back in the 1990s, where he saw that there was this precipitous decline in the rates of people going to the bowling league, Kiwanis Club, church groups, right? What happened is people became more secular, is that they stopped going to the regular events on their calendars that connected them with other people, with their friends. Well, one of the silver linings, perhaps, of this COVID pandemic is that more people are making time in their schedules to connect with family, friends. And I really hope that that stays even after the pandemic, that we make time for the important people in our life, that we don't give our husbands and wives and best friends and kids whatever scraps of time are left over, but that we book that time with the important people in our life. Right. And then finally comes the work domain, which is the last domain. Most people focus on that domain first and they schedule out their work tasks. That actually, I think, needs to come last. And we need to understand that there are 2 types of work. We have what we call reactive work, and then we have reflective work. Reactive work is how most distracted people spend their day. Reacting to emails, reacting to meetings, reacting to notifications, all the time reacting to what other people want of them. Now, some portion of your day, of course, is going to be spent doing reactive work. And depending on your job, it's going to be a different proportion. So, if you're in customer service, for example, your job is to sit by the phone from 9 to 5. You're paid hourly. And if the phone rings, you pick it up. It's purely a reactive job. But if you are a knowledge worker, some portion of your day needs to be spent doing reflective work. Reflective work requires you to work without distraction. And this is where the real work gets done. This is where the creative problem solving happens. The planning, the strategizing only happens during reflective work. And if you don't book that time, and I don't care how much time that is, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, doesn't matter. That is your competitive advantage, okay? If you want to beat people in your industry, right? If you want to be top of your game, make time to think, because I promise you, almost nobody in your industry is doing that, is making that time to think. It's incredibly important to have that time for reflective work in your day. And so by planning that schedule, by making a time box calendar, now we have a physical artifact. Now we can look at that calendar, and you can do this once a week. About 80% of the people can do this once a week. So for me, I do it Sunday nights. I have time in my calendar for 15 minutes to time box my week ahead. Okay, that's all it takes, because I have visibility into about a week's time. Now, but maybe you work in the kind of job where you say, oh, I don't have that kind of visibility. I have no idea on Sunday what Tuesday, Thursday is going to look like, right? No problem. You can take those 5 minutes and do it first thing in the morning when you have visibility into what your day looks like for ahead. Now, once you set that time box schedule, you have to follow it, right? Because again, you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. So the only way to know what you got distracted from is to be able to look at that calendar and say, right now I plan to play video games for an hour. Everything else is a distraction. If I do work, it's a distraction. Oh, right now I plan to do that big proposal. If I check email, that's the distraction, because that's not what I plan to do according to my values. And so time boxing is a really critical technique. It's also allows us to do what I call schedule syncing. Schedule syncing will change your life. You can do this with your boss. You can do this with your spouse. It's a life-changing practice. And all it does is involve taking 15 minutes, sitting down with your boss and saying, look, boss, here is my schedule for my week ahead. Okay, by the way, your boss will worship the ground you walk on, because they are dying to know how you're spending your time, but they don't want you to feel like you're being micromanaged. So do this proactively. Show them, hey, here's my time box calendar. Now you see this other list? I wrote down here on this other piece of paper all the stuff I couldn't fit into this week's schedule. Can you help me reprioritize? Now, why is this so important? Because it buffs this terrible advice that we've all heard in the productivity community. We've all heard this stupid advice that goes like this: if you want to be more productive, you have to learn how to say no. What kind of stupid advice is that? If you say no to your boss, you're biting the hand that feeds you. You're going to tell your boss, no thanks, I'm good, I don't want to do what you want me to do. No, that's ridiculous. Anybody who's had a real job, only an academic professor would advise such nonsense. You're going to get fired. Instead of saying no, you're asking your manager, your boss, to help you reprioritize by saying, I'd love to do that. What should I take out of my schedule so I can replace it with that other task? Okay. It's about helping your boss do their job, which is to help you prioritize. But that can only be done when we have a time box schedule.
Now I don't feel so stupid for having a think in my Google Calendar every week.
I love it.
So I think these are really great, pragmatic, and I use many of these ideas. And I'm wondering also the extent to which you think that, first of all, that there's individual differences in people's kind of personalities, and the extent to which they not only can but want to use these kinds of, because here's what I worry about. Part of what I've done across 20 years of my career is everything that I have done when I have been distracted and pulled towards something has been a signal for what I should be following in my work and in my play and in my, when my kids distract me from my work, it's a signal that actually I really would like to connect with them and I haven't connected with them enough, right? So I think there's some really interesting ways of thinking about distraction also as a signal towards things that you are intrinsically interested in, and thinking about that more as a signal to prioritize or rethink and reflect in the way that you thought about this. And indeed, using those techniques that you've talked about, I think if I time box myself to that degree, I would lose that spontaneity and the thing that makes me feel sort of alive, which is like, wow, that thing that I had never expected to light me up, lit me up. What does that say to me, right?
Yeah.
So what do you
So
say
we
about
want yeah, we absolutely. So we want to think of this process not as a drill sergeant. That's not the right mindset. It's not, oh, I made my calendar. That's it. It's going to be my calendar forever. But rather as a scientist. What does a scientist do? A scientist makes a hypothesis, runs an experiment, looks at the results, and then based on the evidence, based on the data, runs another experiment. And that's exactly what we do with a time box calendar. So for example, I used to have my writing time in the afternoon. And then, the next week I would look at that and say, you know what? I really didn't enjoy that writing session, writing in the afternoon. Let me try writing in the morning. Well, now I find that I just have more energy in the morning. I'm more focused in the morning. I don't know why, but I just like it better. It was sending me a signal. That's great. No problem. You can always adjust your calendar, but not the day of, not the minute of. Adjust it week to week or even day to day in advance with intent, right? So these ideas are not mutually exclusive. You can absolutely listen to the signals that your emotions are sending you, that maybe you want to spend your time doing this or that, or change your values. No problem. You should be flexible as life throws curveballs at us, as our values change, as we grow up. Totally fine. We do that though in advance, right? Because there's a big difference between a distraction and a diversion. A diversion of attention is great. I love diversions. I want to go to, watch a movie on Netflix, for example. That is a diversion of attention. I will pay for the privilege of having someone divert my attention away from the real world for a few hours. That's wonderful. It's entertainment. There's nothing wrong with it. I will pay for the privilege. I want these products to capture my imagination and transport me away. That's great. What I don't want, what is always negative, what there's no good side around, is distraction. Because distraction, by definition, is taking me away from what I plan to do with my time according to my values. So diversion is great as long as it's planned for. Distraction is never a good thing.
So I really think this is an interesting distinction, and one that I have not made. It's interesting to try to connect it up to the emotion regulation literature and research, because in that body of work, you've got all sorts of things, and you even talk about it in your book. Things like rumination as an emotion regulation strategy, not a good thing. It's going to amplify your negative emotions. It will amplify a whole lot of, and it's related to anxiety and depression and so on. And you do a really good job of saying that's what we do with distraction. But distraction itself, like gross, and other people have talked about distraction, short-term distraction, as potentially being an incredibly effective emotion regulation strategy. When you are grieving and something uncontrollable has happened in your life, you can sit with it. There's something really good with sitting with it and
Totally.
meditating, etc. But actively, and so you would call that, are you saying not
Diversion.
a distraction, but a diversion?
Exactly. So I talk about in the book about how, we know that diverting attention can be a wonderful pain management technique around how, children who are going through very painful cancer treatments are given video games to divert their attention. Right. And we talk about, oh, video games are so evil. They make our kids terrible and, rot their brains. Well, no, it can be a wonderful diversion to take our minds off of pain. Right. But it's a diversion. Right, for that child. That is exactly what the parent and child want for the child, is to ease their pain. That's exactly what they're planning to do with their time. It's when we escape that discomfort because we can't handle it in a healthful way. Right. It's all about whether it's adaptive or maladaptive. So if it's a diversion that's planned for, it's something we want to spend our time meditating, praying, playing a video game, drawing, walking, whatever it is you want to do with your time is wonderful, as long as that's what you decide you want to do with your time in advance, not according to someone else's schedule.
That's great. Thank you. So let's open it up for discussion, because I want to make sure that everybody has the chance to ask any questions they might have. You've got a lot of information that you presented here, and it's all in here as well, especially the I think what you don't have time and didn't have time is to get to some of the very specific strategies that you outline in the book. And you also have downloadable things that you can get as accompaniments to the book. So that's great. But maybe we can open it up to other people and ask them to speak up.
I would
Sure.
thank so
And
much.
I'll before we dive in, I'm just going to put in the URL in case you have further questions, you want to reach out, or I don't get time to answer your question. I just put in my URL into the chat function. And I'm also going to type in this tool I built around schedule making, because I know there was some questions around that. So I built a free tool. You don't have to sign up for anything. It's completely free. If you are interested in how do I make a time box calendar, you can use this tool, and that'll get you started. And again, it's you don't have to sign up for anything.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to open the floor. Thank you so much, Nir. And if any question lands in my inbox, I will also forward it to you, of course.
Sure.
So please use the hand up sign or emoji here via reactions at the bottom if you've never used this before. And we will try to make time for as many questions as we can. Question, not an essay. And let's dive more deeply into the questions covered during the salon. Rick, please go. And if you can, just very quickly intro yourself, who you are, where you are, for those of us who don't know.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Nir. I'm Rick. I'm in Berlin. I wonder, in researching the book, what was the part of the research that you found most compelling, but then most difficult to implement yourself?
Good question.
Most compelling. Okay. I know. Okay. So remember we talked about pacts and pre-commitment devices. Now, there's a type of pre-commitment device that we call a price pact. And I learned this technique when I studied the science of smoking cessation. Turns out the most effective smoking cessation study ever conducted was one where people wagered money that they would receive back if they didn't smoke, as tested by a 6-month urine test. If they didn't smoke, they got the money back, plus a small prize, a small monetary win as well. Now, this technique was more effective, much more effective than traditional methods like nicotine patches, etc. It was also more effective than giving someone the same amount of money without having them to investing. So they gave people 400. So they made people put in $150 plus a $450 bonus, or gave people $600. Now you would think that $600 of someone else's money should be more motivating than $150 that you put in that you would receive back plus $450. The $600 should be more motivating, but that wasn't the case. The study that was most effective was when people put in some amount of wager of their own money, and they utilized what we call loss aversion. That was so much more effective than any other smoking cessation program around. Literally, still to this day, the most effective smoking cessation study in history for something that is so addictive. Nicotine, oh my God, it's so addictive. Turns out you pay people a little bit of money and have them put up a bet and they stop smoking. So I wanted to figure out how to implement something like this in my own life. Now, this is an advanced technique, okay? So don't go out there and use this technique on yourself until what I'm about to tell you, until you have done the other 3 steps first, okay? This will not work. It will backfire if you don't first master the internal triggers, make time for traction, and hack back the external triggers. But so for years, I struggled with my weight. Okay, I hated exercise. I would hear from my friends about how, oh, I just ran this half marathon and I feel great. I have a runner's high. And I would have no idea what they're talking about. Like running and exercise was just pure misery for me. Today, years later, I love exercise. I do it frequently because I truly enjoy it. I'm in the best shape of my life at 43 years old. And I'm not saying this to brag, but I have a 6-pack because I exercise regularly. Well, how did I do that? Part of what I did, I did the other steps first. I mastered internal triggers, made time for traction, hacked back external triggers, but I instituted a price pact. Here's how it works. Every morning when I wake up, in my dresser, I see a calendar. And on that calendar, on today's date, is taped a $100 bill. Now, above this calendar on the shelf is a Bic lighter. And every day I have a choice to make. This is called the burn or burn technique. I can either burn some calories by taking a walk, going to the gym, doing some push-ups, doing something physical to burn some calories, or you see where this is going, I have to burn the money. Burn or burn. Burn some calories or burn the money. Now you think most people say, oh my God, I could never do that. That's crazy. That's awful. I would never do that. Guess what? It's been 5 years now? I've never burned the money. I've never burned the money. Why? Because I do the exercise. As a last line of defense, there's a monetary disincentive to not doing what I said I was going to do, to getting distracted. So I keep my money and I'm in the best shape of my life, right? And that's just one example of one potential, of one technique. There's dozens of other techniques in the book, other price packs, effort packs, identity packs. But that was the one that you said, what was the one that was most surprising? One, I was very surprised that this was such an effective technique to get people to stop smoking. Two, it was the most difficult to do. And one of the things that same smoking cessation study found was that very few people wanted to sign up for the study, which is crazy, right? People will pay thousands of dollars, lose their money to get someone to help them lose weight or help them stop smoking. But if it's put up your own money that you would get back, make a bet with yourself, ooh, I don't want to do that, right? There's this resistance. Why? Because we might actually have to do what we say we're going to do. And so it was very difficult to actually, take that step and do it, even though I knew it would work. And it definitely has.
But don't try it at home without doing that. I have to say, I quit smoking after 20 years, exactly 1 year ago. So this
Congratulations. That's awesome.
I had to employ a whole line of emotional self-blackmail to achieve this successfully. This sounds much better. I should have just done this. Thank you so much. Ryan, you have a question. So we're hopping to Rhode Island. Great to see you.
Ryan Giuliano from Rhode Island in the USA. Thanks a lot, Nir. One of the things I struggle with, I do a lot of reading in personal development, how to balance living and meta living. And what I mean by meta living is the reflection, the planning, the forethought. I understand that that's an important precursor, but in a way that can become its own distraction. I'm curious how you, other than making a business and career out of studying this stuff, how do you balance the kind of doing versus the stuff about the doing?
Yeah, so this sounds a bit Orwellian, but I think freedom comes from constraints. Freedom comes from constraints. That when we have, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I always used to say, like when I had a weekend and I had all the time in the world and nothing on my calendar, those were the days that I had the least fun, actually. Like I didn't get much done. I had this list of 100 things. Oh, I'm going to be so productive. I'm going to clean the house and I'm going to, read a book and I'm going to write my novel. I'm going to do all this stuff and nothing happened. Right? Like I wasted the day watching TV. And it wasn't until I started using this time box technique that I said to myself, well, how much time would the person I wanted to become spend on these things? And that becomes the constraint. This is why, by the way, to-do lists, running your life on a to-do list is one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity. I'm going to go ahead and slaughter this sacred cow of to-do lists. Running your life on a to-do list is one of the worst things you can do for your personal productivity because there is no constraints. Now, I'm not saying don't put things from your head onto a piece of paper. Do that. What I don't want you to do is to wake up in the morning and look at your to-do list rather than looking at your calendar. If that's what we do in the morning, that's what I used to do every day, look at my to-do list rather than my calendar, you already lost, right? Because a to-do list has no constraints. All it does is make us feel terrible because you go through your day after day, you still haven't finished everything on your to-do list. And day after day, week after week, month after month, you're reinforcing a self-image of someone who still hasn't done what they said they're going to do. Right? Loser. It makes me feel terrible. As opposed to when you use a time box calendar, your only objective is not to finish anything. It's not to finish anything. The only objective is to work on what you said you were going to do for as long as you said you were going to do it without distraction. That's the win. It's not checking boxes. It's did I do what I said I was going to do for as long as I said I would without distraction. That's it. And here's the kicker. The people who do that, the people who simply work on a task for as long as they said they would without distraction, actually finish more. They do more tasks than the people who use the to-do list technique. So to answer your question around how do you, avoid the meta living versus the living, it's to plan out how much meta living you want to do. 8 hours a day of reading self-help books maybe too much for you according to your values, but maybe 1 hour a day seems right. That seems like the kind of way the person you want to become would spend their time. So that's why forethought is so important. It's about planning out what's the right balance, because you're absolutely right. Look, we know people who are addicted, and I don't use that term lightly because addiction is a serious disorder. They are addicted to self-help books. They are constantly reading as opposed to actually doing anything in the books. Why? Because it's a way to escape discomfort, as is all addictions. All addictions are about a desire to escape discomfort. It's not about feeling the high. It's about escaping the low. So if I just keep reading self-help books ad nauseum without actually having to do anything about it, well, then I don't have to actually examine my life, and it's not very effective. But by planning out the time, by saying, here's how much time I want to devote to this particular task, or whatever it might be, now I have a constraint. So I think that's a big part of the answer.
Thank you so much. So the two types of loss aversion, the monetary and the anxiety. This is super interesting, but also, I mean, obviously this is a question for another conversation, but how do you define a task, right? So I run a company and we have this motto that documentation is not necessarily task completion, right? A task is you're moving the state of the world from state A to state B. Just, creating a Google document is not necessarily a completed task. And so I think the to-do list is probably in this category. Haider, we're going from Rhode Island to Kuwait. Great to see you.
Hello, everyone. Nir, thank you very much for all the tips. I have 3 quick questions. End of 2019, I was having a conversation with a friend and he wanted to give me advice. And I stopped him. I'm like, honestly, I lost trust in myself. I'm not able to follow any advice because I've failed so many times that I no longer feel like I can commit to anything, So I'm curious to know, like, when you lose faith in yourself to actually do the thing or like follow through on anything, how can you overcome that? So that's my first question. The other thing, a lot of the ideas that you mentioned, because I've read your book, I'm aware of their importance and what to actually do, but I tend to forget, and maybe we've not developed the skills yet to be able to apply them properly. So do you have any suggestions in terms of how to, like it might be a sort of workout routine for the exercises of not being distracted? Is there a suggestion you would?
Well, I'm not sure if I understood the second question. The first question I got, well, I'm not sure if I got the second question.
In terms of like, how do we actually develop? We need to understand how not to be distracted, what's actually influencing us, preventing us from being focused and, on the task. But then is there sort of a program you would recommend to develop these skills?
Okay.
To put them into practice? I wanted to know your thoughts on Gretchen Rubin has a book called The 4 Tendencies, and she talks about people's, the way people respond to pressure by other people, like external commitment or commitments to other people and commitments we have with ourselves. So she makes a distinction between, for example, obligers, people who aren't good at keeping their own commitments, but they're really good at keeping commitments to others. So these kinds of people, accountability would work for them. There are upholders, people who are good at social commitments and personal commitments. And then you have the rebel, so a person who feels like they're being told by other people, they would actually lash out. So accountability does not work for them. And some that are questioners. So they need to have really persuasive arguments for them to actually follow that advice. For me, I feel like when it comes to loss aversion, this is my observation. I don't know how true it is. I feel like I would stress out too much to be able to follow through on it. So I was wondering, in terms of, are there people who loss aversion might not work well for? There's a personality or a tendency that should go for an alternative.
Thank you, Haider. I think this was actually one
Yeah.
question. You just approached
Yeah.
this question from 3 different angles. So we are talking about the person who's making these decisions and that person's self-confidence and you know, your archetype or however you categorize yourself.
Sure. Okay. So let me talk about self-image a bit, because self-image can hurt us or help us. And I talk about it at 2 different places in the book, Indistractable. Here's how self-image can hurt us. So several years ago, in the psychology community, there was this line of research around what we call ego depletion. Ego depletion is this idea that we run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And you probably heard this in one way or the other. I used to say this to myself. I'd come home from work and I'd say, oh, what a tough day at work. I am spent. I have no willpower left. Give me that pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix. I have no willpower left, right? And this idea was popularized by this one particular researcher, and it's kind of something that entered the popular lexicon, this idea that we run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. But as we do in the social sciences, when research sounds a little bit fishy, sounds too good to be true, we replicate the study, we run it again. And it turns out, there's been several meta studies now around ego depletion. It turns out it doesn't really exist. It's not really true, except in one group of people. So Carol Dweck, a researcher at Stanford, wrote a wonderful book called Mindset. I'm sure many of you have read it. She did this wonderful study that found that the only people who actually do experience ego depletion, they really do run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. The only people are people who believe that willpower is a limited resource. That's it. And so we need to be very careful about any time we use a self-limiting belief. And I hear this all the time. I have an addictive personality. I have a short attention span. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm a this, I'm a that. It maybe, but the effect, there's a big difference between effect and effect size. Effect and effect size. Something can have an effect and it be so minimal that it doesn't matter. Right? I call this the difference between working out and talking about protein, right? You ever go to the gym and you see people in the gym and they're in the corner talking about, oh, are you using whey protein or pea protein? Are you using this supplement or that supplement? Instead of freaking lifting the weights, right? How many people do we see like this? Are you taking this focus supplement, the herb with the mushroom and the lion's mane and the green ginkgo, blah, blah, blah? Or are you just planning your time and turning off your fucking notification settings? How about we start with that? And so we need to think about effect versus effect size. The most effective thing you can do, master the internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and prevent distraction with Pacts. One of your questions was, what's the program? That's the program. I spent 5 years of my life making it for myself, and hopefully you'll benefit from it as well. That's the highest leverage. And it's not just my personal opinion. It's not just what's worked for me and thousands of people I've worked with. It's 30 pages of peer-reviewed studies. Now, it's not as fun. It's not as sexy. It doesn't make me as much money as selling you supplements or a personality test. None of that stuff is making anybody much money, but it works. And it's science-based. So that is the most effective 4 techniques that we know. By the way, none of this research is original. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm popularizing really well done peer-reviewed studies that I'm just trying to make go mainstream so that people can actually apply them to their life, as opposed to being stuck in some academic journal that unfortunately not that many people read. So I just want to get back to this one point around how self-image can hurt us if it's a self-defeating belief. But I also want to talk about how self-image can help us. So there's a thing called an identity pact that I talk about in the last part of the book around this pre-commitment device. Identity pacts come out of the psychology of religion. That when someone calls themselves a particular moniker, when they have a noun they use to describe themselves, we know the research finds that they are more likely to conform to the attributes of that identity. So if a devout Muslim is not debating whether they're going to have a beer with dinner. No, a devout Muslim doesn't drink alcohol. A vegetarian doesn't wake up in the morning and say, should I have a bacon sandwich for breakfast? No, they're vegetarian. It is who they are. It is part of their identity. And this is why my book is called Indistractable. Indistractable sounds like indestructible. It's that superpower. It's a moniker. It's an identity. And the good news is we have been here before with something far more addictive than our technology. Think about cigarettes. When I grew up in the 1980s. I was born in the 70s, but I remember the 1980s. And I remember in my household, we had ashtrays in our living room. Everybody did. And anybody born after 1980 is going to think this is crazy, but that's the way the world used to be. You would walk into somebody's home and people would just smoke without asking. That's what happened back then. And now that would be crazy. Can you imagine if somebody walked into your living room and just lit up a cigarette without asking? That would be incredibly rude. Nobody would do that anymore. Why? What changed? What changed is our norms, our manners. We spread what's called social antibodies to inoculate society from these unhealthy behaviors. Not because some law was passed. There's never been a law that says you can't smoke in someone's private residence, but because society changed. We had these new monikers. So here's what happened. People like my mother one day threw away the ashtrays in the living room. And when one of her friends came over and decided to take out a cigarette and was about to smoke, she said, oh, I'm sorry. We are non-smokers. There's that moniker. There's that identity. We are non-smokers. If you would like to smoke, if you'd kindly go outside. And at the time, this was a big deal. Oh my gosh, how rude. You're gonna ask me to go outside to smoke? But of course, today, nobody would dream of smoking in someone's bedroom or in someone's living room, right? We changed our identities. And that's exactly what we need to do with distraction. By having this moniker, by saying, oh, I am indistractable. I'm sorry, I don't return every text message in 30 seconds if I'm with my kids. I'm indistractable. Oh, I'm sorry, I have this slightly crazy practice of keeping a schedule. Sorry, that's who I am. Is that any different from religious garb or a particular diet? No, it's just what we have to do to make ourselves and society better. And finally, I just want to make sure, Haider, I addressed your last question around this concerning question around losing faith in yourself. I think it's about small actions. We know that part of the reason that that exercise, for example, is so effective at reducing depression, it's actually more effective or as effective as many pharmaceuticals, is because it gives us agency, right? It's not actually the exercise itself. I don't think it's the actual exercise itself. It's the fact that it teaches us that we are doing something to change our circumstance. And the same goes for fighting distraction. If we can take small steps, right? Everybody can use one technique to master internal triggers, just one. Everybody can plan one day a week, one afternoon a week, 1 hour a week. Everybody can take small steps to remove the external triggers that don't serve them, right? We can all take these very small steps. You don't have to do everything all at once. It's about finding the efficacy, the personal agency in these small steps one at a time. That's how this grows over time.
Love it. Thank you so much, Nir. And amazing questions, amazing answer. So if that's all right with you, we will do one last question. And then Interintellects want to hang out afterwards a little bit more. And then we will continue the discussion. So we're going to Austin, Texas to Catherine. Hi, Catherine.
Hello. Hi, all, and thanks, Nir. This has been wonderful. I have a pretty simple question after Haider's very, very thought-provoking one. And that is just, I would love to hear more about how you structured the 4 strategies the way that you did. I was really interested when you were stressing to not try step 4 unless you've mastered steps 1 through 3. And honestly, my initial reaction to your burn or burn setup was, well, I would probably get tired one morning and then not feel like running and then not burn the money and it'd be fine. And I'd feel vaguely guilty, but that would kind of be it, you know? So I think some of what you just talked about, especially with identity commitments, is really resonating with me. But I would love to hear more, just kind of why step 1 is step 1 and why step 4 is step 4. How do those flow together?
Yeah, terrific question. I appreciate that. So I rank them in terms of impact and ease. Impact and ease. So how big of an impact would adopting these techniques have, and how difficult are they to adopt? And so the first ones we adopt are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact that we can adopt most easily. And so that's why this stuff around mastering the internal triggers comes first, because it was interesting in what you just said. You said, I know what I would do if I took this burn technique. I would wake up one morning, and what did you say? You said, I wouldn't feel like exercising. This is the number one reason we get distracted. This is why we procrastinate. This is why we don't do what we say we're going to do. I don't feel like it. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. That's why the internal triggers are the most important thing to master, because these feelings, these uncomfortable emotional states, this is why we procrastinate. This is why we get distracted. This is why we don't live out the lives we know we can live, is because of these uncomfortable sensations. So we have to start there. We have to know what to do about it. And I'm not saying you necessarily have to go see a therapist or, anything like that. There are some very simple techniques that we can all use. I'll give you one, just really quick one that I use almost every single day. It's called the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule, this comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. I can't take credit for it. Here's what it says. The 10-minute rule says that when we are about to get distracted, we can give in to that distraction, whether it's smoking that cigarette, whether it's eating that piece of chocolate cake, whether it's checking email when we're supposed to be working on a big project, whatever the case might be, we can give in to that distraction, but not right now. Not right now, in 10 minutes. Why? And why don't we just say no, right? Haven't we all heard this conventional advice of just don't do it, right? Just stop. Turns out that abstinence can backfire in a big way. It's kind of like when you pull on a rubber band. If you pull on a rubber band far enough, right? You pull, eventually you can't pull anymore. When you let go, the rubber band doesn't go where it started. No, it ricochets across the room. And so this is how telling yourself, no, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Okay, fine, I'll do it. When you release the tension of telling yourself not to do something, the brain actually registers the relief of that discomfort as pleasure. And that relief reinforces this behavior to happen again. That the only way I can satisfy that urge is to give into the behavior. We know this with smokers, that when smokers are surveyed and they actually stop and reflect on smoking, they don't even like it. They actually tell you how it stinks. It doesn't make them feel special. It doesn't do anything for them. They don't even get a buzz anymore. All they get is the relief of not having to tell themselves not to smoke. That's it. That's it. And so instead of telling ourselves no, we tell ourselves not yet. And so here's what we do. We say, okay, this happens to me almost every day. I'm writing. Writing is hard work. I constantly want to get distracted when I'm writing. And I've written 2 bestsellers, countless articles. I always, when I'm writing, I just want to go email or check the news or Facebook or do something, anything but the writing. Here's what I do. When I feel that sensation, I feel I'm about to get distracted. I say, okay, I set a timer for 10 minutes. I'll say, okay, set a timer for 10 minutes. I'll put my phone down. And now I have a choice to make. I can either get back to the task at hand, okay, go back to the writing, or do what psychologists call surf the urge. Surfing the urge acknowledges that our uncomfortable sensations, these internal triggers, are like waves. They crest and then they subside. But of course, in the moment, we feel like they're going to last forever. Right? When we feel these internal triggers, we can't imagine that they are going to ever go away. And so that's why we feel like we have to give in, right? We have to do that thing where that urge, we have to give into that urge. But if we give it a little bit of time, if we say, yep, I can totally do that thing, not right now, in 10 minutes. And so by just surfing the urge, by bringing awareness to what you're feeling, not being contemptuous with yourself, not blaming or shaming yourself, but just exploring that sensation, listening to that urge. And what you will find 9 times out of 10, when that timer has gone off and the 10 minutes have passed, you'll have forgotten about the urge. The urge will have passed completely. Not always, but usually that's what happens. And so what you're doing is you're building your muscle, you're building your capacity to prove to yourself that you can overcome that urge. So it becomes 10 minutes, turns into 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it might be. And this is how we build our capacity over time to master these internal triggers, the step 1 of becoming indistractable.
I think this is a beautiful kind of a bookend to our conversation. I see that there are a couple of other questions in the room, but if that's all right, we will just make sure that they are sent to you by email. Or would you like to take one last one, or we move on? I think you have to go to bed.
According to my time box schedule, I need to go.
I know. So we will just
because here in Singapore, it's 10:17 over here in Singapore, so I'm gonna head to bed. But it's been so much fun. These questions were fantastic. I'm so glad I didn't present my slides because this was way more fun taking your questions. But again, if I can be helpful, please reach out to me on my website. There's a contact form there if I didn't get to answer your question. And this was really great. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Thank you so much, Nir. And we will just, guys, we will stay on after the recording has stopped. And thank you, Nir. Bye-bye. Take care.
Everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.
I'm going to stop.